Get ready to take a flamethrower to the official narrative and learn what the elites don't want you to know. You're listening to The Tom Woods Show.
Hey everybody, Tom Woods here. It's episode 2523 of The Tom Woods Show, and somehow I've gone over 2,500 episodes without having John Papola on the show, which just makes no sense to me at all, but whatever the explanation for it, we are rectifying this oversight or injustice or whatever it is right now. John, some of you may know him without realizing you know him. He is a video producer and director who is co-founder, CEO, and creative director of Emergent Order, a creative studio based in the Austin, Texas area. Some of you may know him for a particular set of projects years and years ago. If you recall, the famous, there was more than one, Hayek versus Keynes Rap videos. And I have to say, John, when I first heard about this, people were saying, hey, there's this amazing rap video of Hayek versus Keynes on the business cycle. I thought, this is the nerdiest thing I have ever heard. This is going to be painful and cringe-inducing. Yeah. And, you know, the thing is, on paper, it should be. But in reality, it is absolutely great. And by the way, I do allow my guests to say anything, but you just hold on one second there, John. Just the other day, driving in the car, I put both of those videos on, the original one and then the one in the boxing ring. And my wife and I listened to them again for the first time in a long time. And what I kept saying was, I can't get over how good these rhymes are. I don't know how they came up with such perfect rhymes that also explain the two theories so well. And then she said, and you know what? I have to admit, the music isn't half bad. So anyway, welcome, John.
Oh, Tom, I feel like I may have been on perhaps an earlier iteration of your show, but 2,500 episodes, that's amazing. So congratulations on that, let me tell you. And thanks for having me on.
Thank you. There was a brief precursor to the Tom Woods Show. It's not impossible that you were on that. And you could have, but, look, the old man, his memory isn't what it was. But at the very least, it's been a very long time. I was very glad in Las Vegas to have a chance to appear on Dad Saves America, your podcast. And that was a lot of fun. We have some things to talk about here, though. And
that's right.
I want to talk about economics a bit, but also what I want to try to do is, for at least a short bit of this episode, try to deal with people who we might describe as being on the dissident right. Because you see a lot of those people kind of implying that economics is really for nerds. And, that was cute and everything in the Ron Paul days. But now we have like big culture war issues to take on. And, you're just bothering us with your dumb, stupid opinions about things that don't matter. And I want to say to them that actually, it really, for everything you claim to care about, family and culture, economics actually matters.
Yes.
If there are consequences for families when you're interested in the welfare of families, there are consequences for families when economics is not gotten right. So let's start with your case. If you have a background in TV and production, stuff like that, how did you ever, first of all, even come to hear of our crazy ideas?
Well, I think the reason why you and I have known each other for a while is because I really came in to the Econ head sort of nerd libertarian world through Ron Paul. You could say it's actually through Ron Paul and John Stossel, in that I read John Stossel's book and it was like, give me a break. And he was making a lot of arguments for things that, cut across both lines politically. I've always sort of I grew up like a conservative Republican kid. And so that was more like party stuff, It's like, I didn't rebel against my parents. My dad's a conservative. And I was like, oh, no, my dad's right. I love my dad. That's kind of it. It's like, oh, no, that sounds right. Democrats suck. Okay, that's that. I know who I'm for. And then along comes Stossel, making a lot of arguments that are, politically in different directions, legalizing drugs and things like that. And then Ron Paul, that 2006 and 2007 period leading up to the election and calling it making a case for the importance of money and the Fed, and that we don't have a free market economy in the United States. We've got a lot of government intervention, and it's what's causing all of the malinvestment and this boom and bust cycle. And you've got to look out, and you could argue like that Ron Paul was at the right place at the right time with a broken clock, because of the 2008 financial crisis comes along, and it sure as heck looks like the Ron Paul Austrian economic story. But I just went down the rabbit hole with that. And that's what gave rise to the Keynes Hayek rap videos. And it profoundly shapes the way I understand everything. We call our organization Emergent Order out of the ideas of Friedrich Hayek. And I think the economic way of thinking is profound. And people that hand wave it away and say culture war matters, Trump economics, it's like, I don't know why we can't have, sound culture and good economics. Like, since when is this an either or proposition? But yeah, that's how I came into the door. I got on the Ron Paul train. And I mean, one of the reasons why we moved to Austin, non-trivial, was Austin was one of the top cities in Google Trends when you look at cities that are Googling Ron Paul. I remember this back in 2010. It's like, oh man, Austin's like top of the charts for Googling Ron Paul. That's got to be a good city to live.
Yeah, no kidding. I remember there was a initiative that we had. It was a very decentralized movement, as you recall, but yet we had the Daily Paul, we had the Ron Paul forums, we had ways of staying in touch with each other and seeing what everybody was doing. And we had this effort that was aimed at addressing the problem we faced of a candidate who was being blacked out. And so how are we going to handle that? And so one night it was called Paint the Town Ron. So overnight you were supposed to just splash Ron Paul signs all over the place. Google Ron Paul 2008, whatever. And then the next morning your neighbors would wake up and all over the town there would be signs. Well, we did that. I was living in Auburn, Alabama at the time. I was at the Mises Institute. And we had a bunch of Auburn students who were for Ron Paul. And since I was a father of a young family, what kind of vehicle did I have? A minivan, which is great for hauling a bunch of college students around to put signs up surreptitiously at night. And I remember the next day we went out, and sure enough, the signs are everywhere. We went out with our little video camera to record the evidence of what we'd been up to. But just the little things like that. So in other words, I bet that next morning, the number of Google queries about Ron Paul coming from Auburn, Alabama had also likewise reached unusual heights.
Oh, I bet.
I just, those were such wonderful years. And it's sad to me that I may never be able to experience anything like that again. But it was a time of kind of a weird, unexpected, sudden optimism. I mean, it wasn't that we all necessarily thought he would get elected, but it was more that, wow, there are way more people who think the way I do than I thought. And we are way more interesting and more energetic and smarter than people who, go to a Mitt Romney rally, if indeed anyone does.
Well, I think the other thing that was just so interesting, and to his credit, Bernie Sanders did the same thing and accomplished it on a much larger scale. The fans of Ron Paul were young people. It wasn't like, here's this old doctor who's been sort of saying the same stuff for decades, and yet it caught fire in a way that was I think it was maybe the beginnings of the way social media and the internet was starting to reward certain kinds of what at least seemed like authenticity. I think Dr. Paul is a good example of someone who's truly authentic, and it came across, and that was just alluring to people who looked up TV news talking heads and stuffed shirt politicians like Mitt Romney and said, I don't trust any of these people as far as I can throw them. But this baby doctor from Galveston, I think is where Ron is from, Texas. I like him. He seems like he's a good person. He doesn't seem like a crook.
There was something about his just authenticity, I guess would be the word.
Yeah.
That he was unrehearsed, which was a good thing and a bad thing. because there are times I wish he were a little bit more rehearsed.
Yeah.
But
well, he was good. He sort of shares with Donald Trump the slightly rambly kind of talking in a little bit of like a loop, but you're getting somewhere, but you're looping back on yourself a couple times along the way. And
yeah, but we have a destination. I know how the speeches end. I know where we're going to wind up by the end.
It's Jekyll Island.
But those were such thrilling years that the risk I run is that every time I have a guest on like you, whose, let's say, origin story touches on Ron Paul, that the whole episode just degenerates into old stories, so I have to steer clear of that.
Well, I think that the things that Dr. Paul was bringing to the table were, they had that moment that was very acute because of the financial crisis, right? And also because he was a vocal anti-war candidate at a time when the adventures in Iraq and Afghanistan were starting to wear thin on people, and where this story about the war on terror was losing its fear grip on the public. And I think that is a really important part of his story. He was an anti-war Republican, and that was interesting at the time. I think, so in that respect, I actually think Ron Paul had a profound impact on our politics, because he did come before what is now actually is officially the Republican Party. The Republican Party is now, I guess you could say, once again, the party that is, at least claims to be, more skeptical of foreign interventionism. Now, in practice, that's where things get a little more complicated. But, Donald Trump and J.D. Vance, they're not super fans of running around the whole world, bombing people. And I that does seem to be earnestly held as a position. And we didn't have new major conflicts under the last Trump administration. And I think that's something that is a legit thing for those of us that care about peace and freedom, that you should be happy about as far as Trump presidency. So those are all things that Ron Paul was there way before. He was the lone voice on the right on that front.
Hey, everybody, warning, this is an important message for normal people only. So I'm talking about people who want to use online tools, but they'd prefer not to be manipulated or spied on or censored. And as we know, increasingly, Google, Microsoft, Apple, Zoom, the tech bros running big tech today think your private data is their playground for their advertising networks and AI systems. Well, one way you can avoid all these things is not using their quote-unquote free tools in the first place. Federated Computer, on the other hand, offers a full replacement for Google, Microsoft Office 365, Slack, Zoom, all the tools of big tech, but designed for people who care about privacy, don't want to be treated like cattle, and want a great price. Everything's encrypted end-to-end, fully backed up daily, and we're talking about private email, file storage, group chat, WordPress, all the applications you need for your business or team, all bundled into one easy monthly subscription that's 10 times less expensive than big tech offerings. You get unlimited users, fantastic personal customer support from real human beings, and the assurance that your data is your data and not big tech's. Visit www.federated.computer for your free 30-day trial and use coupon code WOODS for 10% off your first 6 months. So how about that? A company that thinks its job is to provide you with services for a great price rather than spy on you or shut you up or manipulate you. So take your first step with other Happy Woods listeners towards digital freedom. Visit www.federated.computer today for your free 30-day trial and use coupon code WOODS for 10% off your first 6 months. And especially when we think about what passes for the right in this country a lot of times, when he was in Congress in 2001, he was giving a speech on the House floor saying that as the dot-com bubble was unwinding, they're blowing up a real estate bubble now instead, and that's going to give us a lot of grief in the future. So he just explained exactly what was happening. And yet, right on the eve of it, right on the eve of Fannie and Freddie blowing up and all these other problems that we had, now he's deceased now, but for example, Herman Cain, who was a candidate for president at that time, was saying that the economy is great, and the only people who disagree with this are liberals who hate America and hate George W. Bush. I mean, like, it was that level of analysis, low level of analysis. That was the thin gruel that the so-called American right, had to nourish itself on. And then suddenly Ron Paul comes along and he's got a track record of saying, well, here, this is exactly what they're doing. I'm going to tell you while they're doing it in 2001. And then here is exactly what the consequences will be. So now this all, it's surprising that people, let's say in the Republican Party, basically most of them don't know that much about economics. They know a little bit more than the Democrats do, but a lot of them are just right-wing Keynesians, so they'll think that it's really bad if Biden spends a lot of money, but it would be a boost to the economy if we went to war with Iran, and I think, what's wrong with you people? So Dr. Paul was very patiently trying to explain all this stuff. Well, in your videos, I do want to make brief mention of them. It is astonishing to me how in just a few fleeting moments, you are really able to convey the basic gist of what Keynes and Hayek were saying against each other about what makes the economy go up and down. And the refrain about, I want to steer markets, says Keynes, and Hayek says, I want them set free. That in itself is a brilliant encapsulation, because the Keynesian view was that the market economy, if left to its own devices, tends toward the underemployment of resources, including labor. And so it does need to be steered. It does not work on its own. And the Hayekian view, of course, is informed in part by the idea of the conceit involved in thinking that I'll sit here like a planner with my committee and we'll make decisions for the economy, whether that's in the form of a central plan like in the 4-year plans of the Soviet Union, or even in the more modest form of modern-day central banks. We'll figure out what interest rates ought to be. There's a reason interest rates are what they are. Like, you don't think there's going to be a problem if you just set them to something else? So I cannot get over that. And I want to know who wrote the lyrics to those songs.
Well, Russ Roberts and I wrote the lyrics together, and and so it was really a tag team effort. The funny thing was at the time that when I reached out to Russ, I was more into the Austrian business cycle theory than him. So actually the first video, Fear the Boom and Bust, I did an entire pass of the lyrics myself, and then we went back and forth on it. The second one, Fight of the Century, was much more of like a tag team, because we actually had initially developed it as an on-stage performance for the Economist magazine's Buttonwood gathering. And so we're like, oh, okay, it's been a year later. Let's update, where are we now? And then very quickly we realized, oh my gosh, this is 80% of the way towards a sequel song. And so we ended up doing that and released it in 2011. I think that actually, I think that there's a deeper problem that Keynes inflicted on us and our understanding of economics than even the idea of stimulus and this notion that government deficits can be this fine-tuned way to re-employ people, and that the government knows who should be re-employed during a recession, and that you can spend your way into it, or even just waste the money. It can be a waste, but it won't really be a waste so long as it's spent in the name of balancing out the economy. And I think that is, there's an older idea, and it's alluded to in the second video, called Say's Law of Markets. I know you're very familiar with this. I think it's the most profound concept in economics. And when you understand it well, you see right through a lot of charlatanism. And that is the idea that demand is enabled by, is only possible if first there is supply. And what do I mean by that? And what did Say and others who sort of talked about this law of markets, what did they mean? They meant that the way I can go out into the market and buy things is because I have the means to buy them. So how did I get the means to buy them? I had to do something for someone else. I had to create. I had to work and produce to get the paycheck so that I can go and buy. And then it's deeper than that, because what the best I've ever heard explain this is that money, real money that has real value, is a kind of receipt for the contribution to value in the society that was made. If people value this conversation we're having and they pay you for it through advertising or through whatever, that is a receipt for the value creation of this show and this conversation. And it is through the production of this that you have the means to demand anything else. The notion that we get rich simply by having demands or by consuming is so fundamentally fallacious. It's so deeply corrupt. It's like being on a desert island and saying, how will we get rich? Oh, by eating coconuts, we will get rich. It's like, no, we will run out of coconuts by eating the coconuts, by eating the fish. Right. The way we get rich is by planting more coconut trees. And in fact, designing tools that make it so that we can actually cut down more coconuts with fewer hours spent devoted to coconut cutting. That's how we get rich. If getting rich means I'm getting to sit back in the afternoon and take a break instead of working until I can't anymore, it's because I invented a way to do more with less. Productivity, producing. So that is Say's law of markets. And what Keynes did was play this sleight of hand where he sort of rephrased it in a way that sounds like gobbledygook. Supply creates its own demand.
And everybody misunderstands that.
And it's like, well, what does that even mean? I don't know what that means. And so he strawmanned the essential law of markets so that it sounded ridiculous. And then said, my straw man is obviously ridiculous. This is what the classical economists believe. Supply creates its own demand. Well, that was nonsense. And it was also just kind of a lie, but he was great at rhetoric. And so he used his rhetorical flourishes to sort of hoodwink all of mainstream economics. And today you see this most clearly in all of the instances where consuming gets treated like the source of economic growth, whether it's claims that Christmas will be good for the economy, or claims that middle-class tax cuts or subsidies are good for the economy because middle-class people spend more of their money.
Yeah, so see, that's what I mean. They're like right-wing Keynesians. They think that we're talking, and I'm not trying to make fun of them. It's just ridiculous that their movement hasn't educated them on stuff like this. We do want middle-class tax cuts for just because we want tax cuts. But the benefit of it is not that spending per se is a great thing, because spending is basically just the consumption half of things. It's just using things up. We never have to worry about encouraging people to use things up or consume things. You never have to worry about that. That part's covered.
Yes.
As you say, the part that is challenging is creating the stuff that we go out and consume. And you can see that more clearly, John, of course, if we had a barter economy and there's no money.
Yes.
Well, then you would realize when you go to the farmer's market, the only way you can, quote, demand anything is if you've grown something of your own first to trade. So you realize that the first thing is production. Only then can I take the fruits of my production and, quote, demand something with it.
Yeah, the one of the things that is corrupts our thinking is that we have this concept of GDP, and it is treated like a causal relationship. That, GDP is comprised of consumer spending, investment spending, government spending, and net exports, which is to say the money that the country brings in from its exports relative to out, the money that goes out for buying imports, so net exports. Now, that is a definition. Like saying a car has four wheels and drives you places. It's like a tautology. It's like, that is how we're describing what GDP is. But how you get more GDP really isn't baked into that definition at all. If anything, it says nothing about how tomorrow's GDP could be bigger than today's. It just says, well, here's how we measure it. It's like saying, I currently weigh 185 pounds, and that's comprised of fat and muscle and et cetera, et cetera. And I want to weigh more in muscle. Well, okay, measuring my weight doesn't tell me how I'm going to get more muscle. It actually has no bearing on it whatsoever. How you get more muscle is through exercise and working hard and breaking the muscles down and doing all the things that build muscle. But the measurement process tells you nothing about that. Your scale is not a personal trainer. So, this is just stuff that it's like the water we're swimming in. It's everywhere, this fallacy. And so it's not, in fairness to those who aren't used to thinking this way, you really have to encounter the Austrian economics mindset to really grapple with this and not get lost in, well, how do we increase spending? Or, oh, well, this is a good program because it'll increase spending. That thing it's just pervasive, that fallacy.
Well, our friend Mark Skousen, of course, you and I saw each other at Freedom Fest not long ago, has been emphasizing the importance of a statistic called gross output, which official government statisticians have now started taking into account, which he says is better than GDP because it's not just here's the value of the goods and services that have been purchased, the final goods and services, that's just consumption spending. Yeah, if that's all you look at, that's all you're going to see. And you're going to say, I guess consumption drives the economy. But then he shows, by looking at gross output, we see all those stages of production that are far away from the final consumer, but that are no less important for all that, and that keep the structure production going. These are the parts of the economy that the finished product has to make its way through from one stage to the next. And those are all very, very important. And then you add that in, you realize, okay, now I have a much better picture of the economy. It's not just, people handing green pieces of paper back and forth to each other. There's another dimension to this. And then it's just the very idea of where would wealth creation come from? Well, if I invest in machinery that allows me to produce 5 times as much with 2/5 the input, then I can outcompete my competitors, force them to improve their production process. And the result is we can create more stuff for less exertion, for fewer inputs, and therefore we have greater purchasing power. This is how this works. But none of this is known to people because in school you learn about how a bill becomes a law. It's things that they think are important. But this kind of thing that you and I are talking about, it's just not on the radar. So what do you say, though, to somebody who just thinks, this economics, it's all a lot of mumbo jumbo, or it doesn't matter to me. Maybe you have some weird fetish where you just like reading books on economics, but
Fair.
How does it matter to me? Or why shouldn't I be more concerned about issues A, B, and C that are big pet issues of mine and not really worry about economics?
Well, I think that there are lots of issues worthy of attention, and I think cultural issues do matter. And so, and maybe this is just that I've gotten older, but I have found my own concerns becoming increasingly cultural in nature. And I'm not saying
I hate to interrupt because you were so nice to me when you interviewed me. I don't think you interrupted me at all. So I will do this very sparingly, but I'll just say I've grown the same way. But I'm just afraid that some people that pendulum is swinging much too far the other way now, where now economics is something to be treated contemptuously, like it's an afterthought.
Yeah.
It's not so important, and that's what I'm driving.
Well, I think you're right about that.
My priorities have changed too.
I think you're right about that. I think that I don't know exactly how to think about some of the transformations that are happening on the political right. broadly speaking, that, because you and I are both very libertarian minded. And so that's one way of thinking. And that's one sort of like arm that you could say, in the crudest sense, we're like the old school, like, capitalism good, free trade good, less government messing with our lives, telling us what we can and can't buy, telling us how to make this product versus that, saying, telling us how many miles per gallon our car should get, as if the government knows anything about that. They're like, well, the state government can roll flat concrete. So they think that they have some ability to understand everything else. It's like, who will build the roads? It's like, you know what? Just about anybody can build roads. Roads aren't that hard. It's flat concrete. Let's get over that. But I think to your question, why is economics important? I think that economics is important if you care about the truth. Because when you talk to great investment people like Ray Dalio or Warren Buffett, or people who really made really been monumentally successful over long periods of time, what you often hear, maybe even always, is that the number one thing that drives their decisions is the pursuit of the truth. What is the real value of the opportunity? And I think that economics is an attempt to try to understand the truth of human coordination. How do we come to work together? How are we incentivized to do our best? And what are the limits of our knowledge? How do we make decisions in a world where we don't have all the information? Because if we had all the information, then the decision would not only be obvious, but somebody would have already made it. Because if it's so obvious what the right thing to do is, why hasn't it already been done? And the answer there, and this is a very Hayekian, Austrian, Misesian way to think, but it's that we operate in a highly complex world with a lot of moving pieces, and we face trade-offs to our decisions all the time. And to be a reasonable person and to pursue our hopes, our dreams, our plans, we have to understand that nature of reality. We have to understand that when I choose to spend the next few hours of my time doing X, I am foregoing the other things I could be doing. That's economics. It's called opportunity costs. There is a cost for you and I to spend this evening together relative to other things both of us could be doing. That is a cost. It's not a monetary cost, but it is a cost. And when you learn how to think that way, it brings a lot of clarity to the world. It doesn't bring perfect clarity, but it helps you understand it. And it also helps you debunk utter nonsense. And our political class is constantly producing nonsense at an extraordinary rate. If there is a product that the government and that politics produces more than any other, I would say it's nonsense. That and killing. Well, government really does three things. It transfers money to favored groups, which in the West tends to be old people, because old people vote. And so we have most of the transfer spending is Medicare and Social Security. It drops bombs and likes to pay people to build the bombs to drop more bombs. And it produces misinformation and nonsense. Those are kind of the three things government does. And oftentimes the misinformation and nonsense is in the service of dropping the bombs or transferring the money to favored groups. Like, for example, the Social Security Act was immediately a Ponzi scheme. There was never personal accounts. It was never the case that you as the taxpayer were putting money into an account for your future. That was a lie from day one. But it was a lie that you believed because the government from the outset told everyone this is what's happening. And you get a report about your Social Security account. That's fiction. That's a lie. That's fraud. Like if you were doing that in private enterprise, you would be sued out of business for fraud. you would be engaged in essentially a violation of your of your sort of fiduciary duties. If your money manager said, "Oh yeah, no, there's money in an account," but he just gave it to somebody else, he'd be, well, that's Bernie Madoff. That's what Bernie Madoff did. So, but that's it. That's where we are. So economics helps you understand that stuff. It helps you navigate the world and helps you try to understand what the truth is.
Hey, everybody, let's take a minute to thank our sponsor, Persist SEO. If you are getting buried by your competition online, then build your brand, your reputation, and your lead flow with digital marketing by Persist SEO. If you are a small local business trying to compete against large companies in the service industry, then increase your visibility with Persist SEO. Or what if you have low or no leads coming in on a consistent basis? Well, then website search engine and conversion optimization can help move the needle to a more prosperous business model for you. Are you tired of cold calling and networking, meeting places getting shut down? Use your website as a lead generation engine. Or what if you're not showing up for your services in the search engines? Well, get found with Persist SEO's expert search engine optimization. All you have to do is call 770-580-3736 or visit them at ineedseo.help for a free website audit and consultation. That's 770-580-3736 or ineedseo.help. That's basically what motivates me. I feel like it does help me to understand that the world works a particular way and that it doesn't matter. I can wish all I want, but wishing won't change how it actually works. But I can't help getting over thinking about the money issue, because unfortunately, money is off the table. Yes, Ron Paul talked about the Fed, and there are more people interested in the subject now. But really, the idea of a sweeping monetary reform seems to be of a slim possibility, and yet that gets to the heart of so much of what's wrong here. I mean, it's because we have this crazy kind of money that we have that the Fed is able to create the boom-bust cycle. But it's also because of this kind of money that people they're on a hamster wheel just to stay even in terms of maintaining their purchasing power. Whereas, as Guido Holzman used to point this out quite a bit, that in the old days, they did not have to do this. They did not have to say, oh, I'll put my money in some fund. And, the funds have a pretty good record, so I'll probably be okay. Well, that's worked. That's worked for plenty of people. But what if you don't want to do that? I just don't want to do that. I just want to take my money and save it. What if I just want to do that? Why should there be prejudice against me? I just want to do that. You can't do that. You'd be ruined. But when we had sound money, you could do that. Now, you could make even more if you invested the money. That's true. But if you wanted to be super conservative, you could do that. No problem. Done. But we can't even conceive of that now. So the presence of monetary inflation and rising prices means that there's much greater incentive to go out and spend, right? I might as well spend now because it's going to be more expensive tomorrow. So I might as well spend it immediately. And this does not encourage good behaviors. Or then you get the other possibilities that things are now so far out of my reach that I can't even do that. And so how is it good for young people not to be able to start families, to feel hopeless? These have real economic causes. They have cultural causes too, but the problem with the money is at the very heart of what's going on these days. And so it's very important for us to talk about that. So that's why I want to keep coming back to it, make sure we don't forget this stuff that we learned in the Ron Paul days.
Well, I think that the one benefit we have now, relative to back in 2006 and 7 and 8, is we do have Bitcoin, we have cryptocurrencies, and what they have done, if nothing else, is they've created an entire new class of people. And I don't mean that in some Marxian sense. I just mean a group of people who are excited about this thing. And they're excited about it for exactly the reasons you're talking about. They understand, because it's built into the conception of Bitcoin and its design, that the rising value of your store of value could be a good thing and could be possible. And I think money is complicated, and I have mixed feelings about how to think about it in this sense. So I do believe that a lot of problems that we have are hidden below the surface of the monetary system's mischief that it enables. The ability, for example, of our politicians to get away with spending money and borrowing at rates that would otherwise not be possible, I think is enabled by our, fiat currency and the fact that we have what, used to be known as the exorbitant privilege. US Treasury bills and US dollars are still considered safe assets relative to all of the other trash government paper out there on planet Earth. So whenever there's a problem, demand for treasuries and dollars goes up. That will not likely last forever, but it might last well past you and I being alive. We might not live to see the kind of pressure that would get put on the U.S. Treasury if they truly got relegated to junk bond status or were threatened with serious downgrade. In the 90s, a bunch of countries started moving away from, big deficits and sort of big government, relative to where they were. In Scandinavia, in New Zealand, in Canada, most of which with left of center governments. And they did it because they bought into this socialistic, let's go hog wild, Keynesian deficit nonsense. It blew up in their faces and their bonds started getting downgraded. And so since they weren't a monetary superpower like the United States Treasury and Federal Reserve, they had no choice. When the Canadian government's debt's getting downgraded, they got to do something about that, whereas we kind of don't, not yet. And so I do think that produces a lot of problems. I do think it can be oversold, the extent to which sound money is like this seen as a silver bullet that'll right the ship along every dimension. There's a lot of problems that are not in the long run monetary, but they're real and they're about housing, for example. Housing's actually a really interesting example here. So heading into 2008, we were all, Ron Paul, me, you, we were all saying, look, this is a giant bubble. This is completely crazy. It's all fake, right? This is all low interest rates, artificially low because the Fed is printing money like crazy and putting it into the open market, and it's getting spun into all these investment vehicles and stuff, CDOs and whatnot from Wall Street and from Fannie and Freddie that magnified the nature of the problem. But the underlying problem was monetary. And so we had this housing boom and bust. The pushback that I think is completely fair is that housing prices today are a lot higher than they were at the peak of 2006. And I think the reason for that isn't that we're in the longest bubble in all of human history. I think what's the reason for that is because every government in this country makes it hard for people to build housing. We have a structural shortage of housing because government, often because of not in my backyard, small sort of the dictatorship of the homeowning class, if you will, don't want more housing built. They don't want things built in their neighborhood that they think are ugly or whatever. There's all kinds of reasons. In California, it's I saw a frog. You're not allowed to build any more shopping malls in the state. It's the stuff that's going on. So I think there's a monetary problem that creates fluctuations that are fake and that trick people into investing in projects that don't make sense, if not for artificially easy money. This is malinvestment, as the Austrians like to say. But then there's also things that aren't really monetary. They're real. They're real problems that need to actually be reformed, even if we had a perfectly stable, monetary system that if I just put my money in a safe it goes up in value at the rate of improvements in productivity and purchasing power, which is what would happen. You'd have if we had like essentially like a real gold currency, gold-backed currency, for example, that was broadly shared. When Apple invents a better way to produce iPhones, and when new electronics and AI and robots bring down the cost of manufacturing, the gold in your safe would just keep going up in value. Money holders would benefit from the productivity of the economy without having to put it at risk in investments. And then, as you said, they could invest it and make even more, but it wouldn't sit there losing value like it does today with US dollars. So this stuff's complicated, but I think the money is the operating system of economics. And so when you mess with it, you basically create bugs in the system that cause things to go haywire unnecessarily.
I want to switch gears for the final thing I want to ask you. And it's a big one. But you have a podcast called Dad Saves America.
Yes.
Now, it is not at this stage of it a podcast about fatherhood. However, I would like to make the next several minutes into a podcast about father. So, because we've been talking, we've hinted here and there that as we've gotten older, the things that really move us or concern us have maybe shifted a bit. And I bet at least some of that has to do with the fact that we've both transitioned into fatherhood. Mm-hmm. So, which is a good kind of transition. So can you tell me, first of all, how many kids do you have and what are their ages?
So I have one son. He's 19. And at the end of next month, he gets on a plane to Italy to start studying in Italy. So I'm going to be a blubbering mess. So don't go inviting me on your show in early September unless you want to hear a classic Italian man crying too much.
Oh, John, I am so sentimental when it comes to the kids. So sentimental. If they ever go off somewhere, whatever, I can't take it. It's and as they're getting older, like I've got 3 who are adult age now, and and they're still more or less in the area, but not forever, and it's just absolutely killing me. But for now, we're still making great memories and all that. But I know if I ask a question like this, the risk of cliches is very high, but it's a risk I'm willing to take. How did it change you? And do you feel like you're the sort of person who would want to tell people, ultimately it's up to them, but are you the sort of person who would want to say to somebody, you're really, really depriving yourself of something truly spectacular and irreplaceable if you don't have a child?
You teed me up beautifully.
Okay.
So the way, and I've done some videos about this on the channel because Dad Saves America is not strictly speaking about parenting per se. It's about how do you develop a philosophy and practical things, but philosophically, the mindset for raising a generation that can thrive in a free society and want to keep it. That's what Dad Saves America is about. So we talk about a lot of stuff on the show. Sometimes sometimes it's economic stuff. Sometimes it's about where we should send our kids to school and how do we learn and how do we develop grit and resilience and mastery, a sense of agency, a sense that we own our lives. Well, when I was an ambitious guy, I was a rising young creative director in New York City in Viacom, and Lisa and I, my wife, we met at work at Nickelodeon, and then we got married, and my son was born. And when my son was born, it was utterly transformational in ways that nobody prepared me for. What do I mean by that? You always hear people say, "Oh, fatherhood's great because you man up, right? Now you've got responsibility. Now you're the breadwinner, not just for your family. It gives you motivation to go out there and stay with it, and all of that's true. But the thing that happened for me, and I think this happens for a lot of people actually, and sometimes I think it happens and they don't fully appreciate it, is that becoming a dad set me free. And what I mean by that is that it placed my own ego and attachments and lofty dreams that I will someday be like Steven Spielberg. It put all of that stuff in this category of nice to have instead of need to have, instead of like my identity is wrapped up in whether I get to make a movie or be like Steven Spielberg or make a certain amount of money or all of these pursuits. And they can be noble pursuits. I'm not against being ambitious, but there's this funny thing. When you wrap up your identity in your pursuits, you are going to be disappointed. You are going to achieve the pursuit and find that, what do I do now? This happens all the time with people. It is very common. Lottery winners end up no happier and often end up back to the starting point because the pursuit of the material has its limits for our happiness. And what becoming a father did was say, that's all gravy now. Because now you have a role that you play that's so profound that everything else seems small in comparison. And what that actually does for you, I think, either you pursue it the right way, which I would say, or you're just a weirdo like me, I guess, is it actually lets you take bigger risks. Because what do you have to lose? Start the company, go for that promotion, change careers, go back to school, although maybe not that, but depends on the school. Mostly no. But what's the worst that could happen? Your kid's not going to care. My son doesn't care very much at all about like what I do. Like he doesn't see me as my job. He sees me as his father. And that is the most liberating, purpose-creating experience I have ever had, and I will ever have. And I think it is not just our moral calling, it is our genetic predisposition, because humans want to keep surviving. We want to procreate. It's baked into the DNA. It's our selfish gene, if you will. But, there are some people that shouldn't have kids because they're not capable of being the kind of adult that kids need to have. I think that's a tiny, tiny minority. Some people don't want kids for whatever reason, and that's their prerogative. I believe in freedom. That's a free society. But most people should have kids. Most people should get married and have kids, and it will be the source of all of their happiness. And when they're on their deathbed, these will be the things, these will be the people they will be thinking of. These will be the memories they will be cherishing. Not how much money they made, not that car or that vacation, except insofar as the vacation is memories about the people in your life, your family. So I am all family all the time. Family is what matters. Have kids. It will change your life in the most beautiful ways. Don't wait too long. Don't buy all the nonsense. And I know people struggle. We were talking about the cost of living. It is expensive. But put it in perspective. Think about what our great-grandparents had to work with when they had many more kids than most of us will have. When they had 4, 5, 6 kids and they came from Ireland or Iran or wherever, Italy, like my family. Like they came here with nothing. They had a bunch of kids. They're working on the docks or in the mines or in the fields, and they made it work. We have it so much better. I know that's like, it sounds Pollyanna-ish. It sounds like, how dare you, you elitist. Too bad. It's the facts. And that's what I have to say about that. I mean, that having kids will set you free.
I'll just say, because I could talk about my kids forever and my take on fatherhood and so on, but I've seen a lot of people online who have said things like, everybody told me being a parent was going to be this wonderful, amazing thing. And it's actually really, really hard and exhausting. So sometimes you'll see a parent who's just, they're at their wit's end or something, and they post something like this. And so I want to be realistic and say, yeah, you will have some it can be sometimes quite difficult, especially for me, the really early years, like 0 to 3. If they could be born at age 3, it'd be way easier from my point of view. Yet my wife is of the opposite opinion. She thinks that the children will still have challenges and problems as they get older, just different kinds of problems. The first one is my diaper needs to be changed. The second one is I'm trying to navigate dating in the year 2024. Like pick which battle it is. But I would say that the happiness outweighs the challenges so much. That's why I keep going back and doing this over and over again. And especially when they get to that age when you can actually, not only can you interact with them, but you can have like a real meeting of the minds.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Like I have a daughter who's 21 and, she may as well be 57 the way, how smart she is. And I can talk to her without having to ask myself, is she going to know that word? Should I try to dumb down my vocabulary? I don't have to. And to be able to do that, or just, I don't know, it's the experiences we have together, traveling. I was saying to Regina, who's the oldest one, I interviewed her when she turned 21 I have a print newsletter that I mail to members of supportinglisteners.com. I sent it in the mail. And one of the things I put in it was an interview with my own daughter about what it was like growing up in this crazy, world of mine, around Mises and Ron Paul and all that. And just talking to her like we're both adults now, and we're talking about her memories and what it was like being 7 and running around the Mises Institute and stuff like that. There's just nothing at all. There's nothing that could replace that. And I told her in that interview that I've had a pretty fulfilling life, according to, there are a lot of boxes I've ticked off, let's say, over the course of my life. But that if it hadn't been for her and her sisters, it would all have in some way been empty. I'm not saying that a childless person can never have a fulfilled life. It's that I'm so much more enriched than I would have been already, thanks to them. And I know sometimes kids worry about, let's say the more conscientious ones might worry that, well, maybe it would be more fun if my parents didn't have to watch me or whatever. But I just don't. It's more fun having experiences with a big family and hearing laughter and watching a movie together, or whatever, baking something in the kitchen or whatever. That's fun. And so that's what brings happiness in the Woods household.
I just went with Lisa and my son and his girlfriend and his girlfriend's sister to see this movie, Sound of Hope, the story of Possum Trot. And it's about a poor, largely Black community in East Texas, who the main sort of Baptist, I think he's Baptist, preacher and his wife start adopting kids. And they are living, to say paycheck to paycheck is an understatement. And everyone in this community does it well, and it's a true story. And the movie's great on multiple fronts, including that it doesn't shy away from what were real challenges with adopting some. So they were like, we want the hardest cases. We want the kids who are really like unadopted. And I think the thing that the longer you're on this earth, the more you realize, because you can't not realize it, because you can't escape. Literally, you cannot escape it. Is that life is filled with suffering. That's a fact. The people you love will die. Some of them will die before you, and you will have to experience their death. They will be your parents, your grandparents, God forbid, but maybe siblings, friends. This is a fact. You will eventually die. That's a fact. And so I think if your model of a happy, fulfilling life is to avoid the risk of pain and difficulty and suffering, you have set yourself up for failure because you cannot live a life like that. And I think that I have been blessed. Our son didn't have any kind of medical challenges. He's a good kid. He didn't get in any trouble substantially with drugs and alcohol or some of these things that can just rip you apart. They can rip your marriage apart. I mean, all of that is true. All of that is true. It's also true that you might be driving down the highway and die in a car wreck this afternoon. And we just can't live our lives that way. We shouldn't live our lives in fear. And I think this is a great way to navigate our information landscape these days. Fear is sometimes warranted. But when someone is trying to convince you of something based primarily on making you afraid, they might not be a demonic villain, but it's a good first indication that they could in fact be a demonic villain, that they might have your worst interests in mind, that they might be seeing you as a tool towards their ends. And so whenever you feel that feeling in yourself, that you're making a decision from a place of fear, from a obsession with the worst case scenario, with catastrophe, that's not the better angels of our nature at work. That's the dark one at work. And I believe that to the bottom of my heart. It's one of the themes of Dad Saves America, that we should not embrace the fear industrial complex. We should not let catastrophizing guide our decision making, because it is a fallacy, and it sets you up to be miserable and to live a life of tragedy. That is unavoidable anyway. So it's a self-defeating, self-revealing prophecy, if you will. So, embrace it all. Embrace making hard decisions and having as many experiences as you possibly can while you're on this planet. That's what I say.
Yeah, I think that is a very, very sound approach. If people want more John Papola, what should they look up? Dad Saves America?
Yep, you should definitely check us out. Our primary platform is YouTube, so youtube.com/dadsavesamerica. If you're loving this and you're like, oh man, I really want to get into that in a big way, if you go to dadsavеsamerica.com, it's actually our Substack where you can subscribe, and that way you will definitely get our latest content in your inbox without being mediated by Google's algorithms. So I encourage you to check us out on YouTube and be sure to go over and subscribe at dadsavеsamerica.com.
All right, I'll put that link below in the video description, also at tomwoods.com/2523. Well, John, thanks so much. Great talking to you, and I appreciate your time.
Tom, it was great to see you in Vegas, and I am honored that you had me on the show. I am not at all offended that I'm episode 2500 and something.
That's good. I'm glad, because there ain't nothing I can do about it. So thanks so much, John, and thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Make yourself and those you love less vulnerable to the regime, both mentally and physically. Get more forbidden information at tomsfreebooks.com, and be sure to subscribe to the show wherever you listen. See you next time.
Like the sound of The Tom Woods Show? My audio production is provided by Podsworth Media. Check them out at podsworth.com.